My dear colleagues, let me express to all of you my words of support and admiration. It is a great honor for me to speak before you today. The conference is dedicated to the 5th anniversary of the moment when psychologists began to be trained at Karazin University. And I'm very grateful to fate that a part of my life was connected with psychologists of Karazin University. First of all, I want to say thank you very much to my teachers, Grigory Kuzmich Sreda and Alexander Konstantinovich Dusovitsky. They are not longer among us, but their ideas are alive as long as it finds their continuation in their students. And today I want to present you a concept that is direct continuation of the ideas of personal development and developmental education that our teachers have explored. The topic of my presentation today is development personality in the flow of childhood. And I want to tell you about what kind of concept it is, the flow of childhood, and why it is good for our children to develop in the flow of childhood. Let me first draw your attention to the one gap.
This is a gap between the attitude towards the child as a subject of activity or as an object of influence. To illustrate this thesis, I want to use a short quote from the speech of Sir Ken Robinson, a world-renowned expert in the field of education and creativity. I think you are all well aware of the animated version of his talk on changing education paradigms. Let me just remind you that Robinson begins his speech with the phrase that every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. He mentioned two reasons for it. The first reason is economic. People try to work out how we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century. Given that we cannot anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of the next week. But to illustrate my point, I would like to draw your attention to the results of a study of divergent thinking conducted by Larry Wint and published in 2005 under the title Fresh Thinking Stimulates Creativity and Innovation. Just 1 minute video, please.
Now, they tested this, and they gave them to 1,500 people. This is in a book called Breakpoint and Beyond. And on the protocol of the test, if you scored above a certain level, you'd be considered to be a genius at divergent thinking. So my question to you is, what percentage of the people tested, of the 1,500, scored at genius level for divergent thinking? Now, you need to know one more thing about them. These were kindergarten children. So what do you think? What percentage at genius level? 80. 80, okay. 98%. Now, the thing about this was it was a longitudinal study. So they retested the same children 5 years later, ages of 8 to 10. What do you think? 15? They retested them again 5 years later, ages 13 to 15. You can see a trend here, can't you? This tells an interesting story, because you could have imagined it going the other way. You start off not being very good, but you get better as you get older. But this shows two things. One is we all have this capacity. And two, it mostly deteriorates. Now, a lot of things have happened to these kids as they've grown up. A lot. But one of the most important things that happened to them, I'm convinced, is that by now they've become educated.
This is what this article looks like. You can find it on the internet. Those are the results of the longitudinal study that shows how creative thinking rapidly degrades with age, or is there something else? Sir Ken Robinson draws two conclusions. First, we all have this capacity. Second, it mostly deteriorates. But I want to add to what Sir Ken Robinson said and make one simple point. A child is not a box with a set of abilities or character traits. A child is a person capable of self-development and self-regulation of his or her behavior and activities. And this characteristic of self is found in the recognition of the subjectivity of the child. As soon as we understand this subjective nature of the child's personality, we will be able to organize such an educational system that is necessary for all of us in the 21st century for the further development of society. And in my opinion, it is a concept of the flow of childhood that can help us in this. Of course, there are different criteria by which one can distinguish a subjective approach from an objective one. We will focus on only one indicator which seems to us the most striking. In my opinion, the main indicator here is the evaluation function, the ability to evaluate the results of one's activity according to criteria. In the object approach, the function of evaluation is derived from the sphere of the child's activity and is not internalized by him. This function is performed by another person, a parent, teacher, or other adult. In the subjective approach, it is commonly believed that it is important to create conditions for the internalization by children of all components of activity, including such a component as evaluation. This gap is not visible at first glance because traditionally most of the scientific research on childhood should be limited to one narrow, specific approach or problem. But this gap becomes noticeable when psychological theory meets pedagogical practice. Let's try a mental experiment and see how it can be. As you can see in the diagram, the growth line of the chart is placed diagonally. Let's take 7 the most well-known theories of the child development which explore childhood from different angles and place them relative to the conditional line of growing up, depending on the attitude towards the child as an object of influence or a subject of activity. Then we'll get something like this picture. Most likely it will be true to say that only 2 out of 7 theories refer to the child as an object of influence. In my opinion, those are Freud's psychosexual development theory and behavioral child development theories. The other 5 theories, let me mention them. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development, Piaget's cognitive theory of development, Bowlby's attachment theory, Bandura's social learning theory, socio-cultural theory of Vygotsky. So the remaining 5 theories, in my opinion, do not deny child subjectivity, although not all of these theories make it clear to us that the subjectivity of the child is a key concept from their point of view. Now let's turn to pedagogical systems. We have educational practices that arose in different countries and in different historical periods, in which the attitude towards the child is not as a set of necessary skills, but as a person endowed with talents and abilities that can be developed. The most famous not-traditional schools in the world are Montessori and Waldorf pedagogy. As we can see, pedagogical systems are not always in close interaction with psychological research. But you who are present here today on this conference know well that the developmental education, it is precisely that educational system that grew out of the cultural historical theory of Vygotsky and consistently adhered to the attitude towards the child as a subject of his or her own activity and a holistic personality. As the organizers and participants of the conference know, the didactics of developmental education has methods and practice of stage-by-stage, dosed and consistent formation of assessment or evaluation as a function and component of the child's activity, starting from the age of 6 and have already been developed. But I have to admit that the data of the dose studies and the results of the longitudinal experiments are little known in the environment of the English-speaking scientific community. So who knows about developmental education in the world? Only a group of enthusiastic researchers and teachers, practitioners who are burning with the idea of a holistic development of the child's personality. And what educational system is best known to everyone? Of course, traditional mass school system. As I have said before, it would be great if each pedagogical system would work in close collaboration with childhood psychology research. But so far we can see only one such example for close long-term cooperation. This is the behavioral theory and the traditional system of education. And this is an educational practice confirmed by large scientific studies where the attitude towards the child is as to object of influence. I'm talking about such internationally recognized programs like the Program of International Student Assessment, or PISA. This is a worldwide study to elevate educational systems by measuring 15-year-old school pupils' scholastic performance in mathematics, science, and reading. The next program of the International Assessment of Adult Competence, PAAC, is a worldwide study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 24 countries of cognitive and workplace skills. At the same time, a set of soft and hard skills and competences is expected from a graduate of the educational system of the 21st century. I refer to the work of Professor Griffin and the Melbourne Graduate School of Education's Evaluation Research Center, which develop evaluation criteria and tests that are used by education systems in many countries. Griffin highlights the ability to think critically, the ability to communicate, and a creative approach to business. Even a quick psychological look at those competences shows that they are multidirectional in terms of motivation. The motivation of the critical thinking self is different from the motivation of interacting self and the motivation of creative self. This approach lacks a concept that can link competences into a single structure in one person. In our opinion, such a concept is the subject of activity and a complete personality. At the same time, this gap began to inflame, at least partly, within the framework of the positive psychology of Seligman. In the business environment was quickly adopted the concept of flow. The ability to enter the state of flow was perceived as synonymous with creativity and productivity. Flow is a mental state in which a person is fully involved in what they are doing, characterized by active concentration and full involved in the activity process. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is considered the most cited author who wrote about the flow. Csikszentmihalyi outlined his theory that people are happiest when they are in the state of flow, a state of concentration or complete absorption with the activity at hand and the situation. It is a state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. Csikszentmihalyi schematically depicted the conditions of the flow in the coordinate system, where the skill goes horizontally and the complexity of the task vertically. The flow is depicted as a meandering line that passes between two boundaries. The lowest bound separated to the area in the right corner of the diagram where the person decided they already knows tasks that are perceived as too easy or routine. This causes a person to be bored. The upper limit separates in the left corner the area where there are tasks that a person perceives as too difficult, impossible, and disturbing. Tasks from this area cause a person to be in a state of fear. Only tasks that are between the described limits cause a person to flow. To achieve a flow state, a balance must be struck between the challenge of the task and the skill of the performer. If the task is too easy or too difficult, flow cannot occur, as both skill level and challenge level must be matched and high. If skill and challenge are low and matched, apathy results. The condition seems familiar to me. I compared Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's description of the state of the flow with how Vygotsky's zone of actual and proximal development is usually modeled. The zone of actual development, what a child can do by himself, here and now, independently. Zone actual development is usually depicted in the form of a small circle. Here are the child's success, the results of the development for today. The child is bored here. The zone of proximal development of it what the child can do with the help of others. Here the child is happy, interested, happy to learn new things. It is safe for him or her here when there is a measure of help from an adult. The zone of proximal development is graphically depicted as the wide outer circle, which is the outer contour in relation of the zone of actual development. But there is also such a zone where there are such tasks that the child perceives as impossible to solve, even with the help of an adult. It is a zone where the child is anxious and even scared. Let's get back to the flow state. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi gives 10 characteristics of people who, in their opinion, live a fulfilling life and familiar with the flow of state. I will not enumerate them. You can see them on the screen. Does this description remind you of anyone? The key is given by Csikszentmihalyi himself in point 8, but in my opinion most of these positions resemble the description of children from 2.5 to 6 years old who concentrate on their games, forgetting about physical reality and receiving great joy from their process. This state is familiar to each of us since childhood, the state of happiness. Now let's come back to Vygotsky again. His ideas about child development continued in the activity approach of Leontiev, and the periodization of mental development from birth to 17 years old developed by Lykonin is considered classic within this approach. This periodization is based on 3 objective signs: new age formation or age-related neoplasm, leading activity, and social situation of development. The periodization can be presented as a scheme of the multi-layered concept of childhood. Various types of activities are located horizontally on the coordinate axis, which gradually lay the foundation for the child's development and form conditional steps. Moving up the stairs, the sequence of the age. In psychology, it is customary to call the word crisis. Age neoplasm are located vertically. Let's combine the idea of Vygotsky development zones, Lykonin's age periodization, and the concept of Csikszentmihalyi flow. Age-related neoplasms are arranged vertically, and changes in leading types of activities depending on age are arranged horizontally. 0, the beginning of life, the starting point, the birth of person. The steps of the age transition are bounded on both sides by two parallel lines. The lower right area under the bottom line contains tasks from the zone of actual development of the child. These tasks are perceived by the child as boring and routine. There is no development here. In the upper left area of this model, above the upper line, there are tasks that are outside the zone of proximate development and cause anxiety and fear in the child. There is no development here either. The trajectory of development runs diagonally between two parallel lines. In the space, in this particular between two parallel lines, zones of proximate development in various fields of successfully expanded. Tasks are perceived as interesting, moderately difficult, and cause a state of joy. This line is the trajectory of the child's development in the flow of childhood. The state of happiness directly correlates with the concept of the integrity of personality. How whole is the grain that has fallen into the soil. But in order for something to sprout from the grain must lose its integrity. These are the rules of the game called life. The child enters this world whole and radiates happiness at the beginning of its journey. Then, as they grow older, this integrity is lost. But with this, many different pieces of experience and different selves arise, and already in adulthood we feel the need to resemble ourselves from these pieces of experience and different selves, to get a new version of ourselves with a new integrity. Perhaps this is the message that Richard Branson is trying to convey to us in his book. The flow of childhood is a space of normal, nature-like, stage-by-stage development of the integral personality of the child. The development of the personality in the flow of childhood occurs due to the expansion of the zones of proximal development in various areas in accordance with the age of the child. Other hypotheses, advantages, and research tasks are related to the concept of the flow of childhood are written in the conference abstracts. I hope they will be published so that everyone can read about it. I will be happy to discuss with you your vision and opinion on the concept of the flow of childhood. In conclusion, I note that the concept of the flow of childhood is the space for the formation of the subjectivity of the child. This concept sets the boundaries where these characteristics of selves is formed gradually.
The most important thing that in this concept the child is perceived precisely as the subject of his or her own activities and an integral whole personality. I see that in this concept there is a scientific potential in order to see and explore the child and the period of childhood, not in a part but in a holistic way. Thank you very much for your attention. Stay safe. Slava Ukraini.